Before watching this video, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's dive into the story. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring out of the window as the early morning sun painted the city in golden hues. For as long as he could remember, he had believed in the values his parents had instilled in him: loyalty, honesty, and integrity. These were the principles that had guided him through life, shaping his decisions and defining his relationships. He thought about Samantha, his wife of 3 years. When they had first met, she had been a whirlwind of energy and light. Samantha was the kind of person who could walk into a room and instantly become its center. Her laughter was infectious, her ambition inspiring. Daniel had fallen for her hard, drawn to her warmth and drive. Now, as he glanced over at the empty side of the bed, he couldn't shake the gnawing sense that something was wrong. Samantha had already left for work, her usual goodbye kiss hurried and distracted. "Just pregnancy stress," Daniel muttered to himself, trying to dismiss the unease that had been growing in his chest for weeks. Daniel and Samantha had been the envy of their friends and family. Their relationship seemed perfect, a strong partnership built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Samantha's pregnancy had brought them even closer, or so Daniel had thought. He remembered how her eyes had lit up when they'd seen the positive test, her excitement infectious as they talked late into the night about baby names and nursery designs. Daniel was determined to be the best father he could be. He had grown up in a small, hard-working family, and he wanted to give Samantha and their child the stable, loving home he had always cherished. The first signs that something was amiss were so subtle that Daniel almost missed them. Samantha had always been open and communicative, but lately she seemed distracted. She often stared off into the distance, her mind clearly elsewhere, and when Daniel asked if something was bothering her, she would smile and brush off his concerns. "It's just work, Daniel," she'd say, her voice light, but her eyes distant. "There's a lot going on with this promotion coming up." Daniel wanted to believe her. He knew how much her career meant to her, and he admired her dedication. Samantha worked in corporate strategy, a demanding field that required long hours and unwavering focus. Late nights weren't uncommon, but recently, they had become the norm. "She's just working hard for the baby," Daniel told himself, ignoring the growing pit in his stomach. Then there was the matter of her phone. Samantha had always been casual with it, often leaving it on the coffee table or the kitchen counter. But now, she carried it with her everywhere. If it buzzed, she would check it quickly, her expression unreadable, and then place it face down on the nearest surface. Daniel tried to dismiss it as paranoia. "Everyone's protective of their phones these days," he reasoned. But the change was undeniable, and it left him feeling uneasy. One evening, Daniel decided to confide in his best friend, Lucas. The two had been close since college, their bond strengthened by years of shared experiences and mutual trust. Lucas had always been the voice of reason in Daniel's life, the friend who could offer perspective when emotions clouded his judgment. "I don't know, man," Daniel said, swirling his coffee absent-mindedly as they sat in a quiet cafe. "It's probably nothing, but I can't shake this feeling. Samantha's been acting different." Lucas listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. Different how? Daniel hesitated, unsure how to put his feelings into words. "She's distracted, distant, and she's been working late a lot more than usual. Plus, there's the phone thing. She's never been so protective of it before." Lucas leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. "Have you talked to her about it?" "Yeah, but she just says it's work stress. And maybe it is. I mean, she's pregnant and there's a promotion on the line. It makes sense, right?" Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied Daniel carefully before speaking. "Daniel, I know you love Samantha, and I'm not saying there's anything to worry about, but if your gut is telling you something's off, maybe you should trust it." Daniel tried to take Lucas's advice to heart, but as the weeks went by, the unease only grew. Samantha's late nights became more frequent, and her explanations felt increasingly hollow. She would come home exhausted, barely acknowledging Daniel before collapsing into bed. One night, As Daniel lay awake next to her sleeping form, he couldn't help but feel a growing chasm between them. The woman he had once felt so connected to now seemed like a stranger. The tipping point. It was a chilly Tuesday morning when Daniel received a text from Lucas. Lucas. Hey, can we meet for coffee later? There's something I need to tell you. Daniel felt a flicker of unease at the tone of the message. Lucas wasn't one to be vague or dramatic, and the urgency in his words set Daniel on edge. They met that afternoon at the same cafe as before. Lucas was already seated when Daniel arrived, his expression tense. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, sitting down across from him. Lucas hesitated, looking around the crowded cafe as if searching for the right words. Finally, he leaned in, his voice low. "Daniel, I saw Samantha the other night. She wasn't alone." Daniel's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Lucas sighed, his expression pained. "I was out with some colleagues and I saw her at a restaurant. She was with her boss. At first I thought it was just a work dinner, but Daniel, the way they were interacting, it wasn't professional." The words hit Daniel like a punch to the gut. He stared at Lucas, trying to process what he was hearing. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucas nodded. "I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't. I thought you should know." Daniel sat in stunned silence, his mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle, the late nights, the phone, Samantha's distracted behavior, all seemed to fall into place, forming a picture he couldn't bear to look at. That night, Daniel waited until Samantha was asleep before taking her phone. His hands trembled as he unlocked it and began scrolling through her messages. What he found confirmed his worst fears. A series of texts between Samantha and her boss painted a devastating picture of betrayal. The messages were flirtatious, intimate, and unambiguously inappropriate. Daniel's chest tightened as he read each word, his heart shattering with every line. Daniel stared at the phone in his trembling hands, each message cutting deeper into his heart. His mind raced with disbelief and anguish. The texts between Samantha and her boss, Richard, were undeniable. Their words revealed more than just a professional relationship. They were full of intimate confessions and secret plans. His hands tightened around the phone as a wave of nausea washed over him. This was the woman he had vowed to spend his life with, the mother of his unborn child. The betrayal was unfathomable, and yet here it was, staring him in the face. He spent the rest of the night in turmoil, unable to sleep or think clearly. By the time the sun rose, Daniel felt like a shell of himself. He had always prided himself on his strength and resilience, but this was something else entirely. When Samantha arrived home that evening, her face was lit with a warm smile, as if everything was normal. Daniel couldn't stand to look at her. He had spent the day replaying every moment of their relationship, wondering how long he had been blind to the truth. "Hey," she greeted, setting her bag down by the door. "How was your day?" Daniel didn't respond. He simply stood in the living room, holding her phone. The evidence of her betrayal was still displayed on the screen. Samantha's smile faltered as she noticed his expression. "Daniel, what's wrong?" He finally spoke, his voice colder and steadier than he had ever heard it. "How long, Samantha?" Her brow furrowed in confusion. "What are you talking about?" He held up the phone, his eyes locking onto hers. "How long have you been lying to me? Was it worth it? Was he worth it?" The color drained from Samantha's face as she realized what he was holding. Her eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears. "Daniel, I can explain." "Explain?" he interrupted, his voice rising. "Explain what? That you've been sneaking around with your boss while I've been here, building a life for us? For our child?" Tears streamed down her face as she tried to approach him, but Daniel stepped back, his anger palpable. "Don't. Just don't." Samantha's words were a jumble of apologies and excuses. She claimed she had been overwhelmed by the pregnancy, the stress of work, and her fears about their future. But to Daniel, her reasons felt hollow. "You had a choice, Samantha," he said, his voice breaking. "Every time you stayed late, every time you texted him, you chose him over me, over us." Samantha fell silent, her sobs filling the space between them. For a brief moment, Daniel felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the searing pain of her betrayal. "I can't do this," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've destroyed everything we built together." That night, Daniel left the house. He needed space to think, to process the devastation that had upended his life. He drove aimlessly through the city, his mind a chaotic swirl of anger, sadness, and confusion. Memories of their relationship played in his mind like a cruel montage. Their first date, their wedding day, the moment they found out they were going to be parents. Every happy memory was now tainted by the knowledge of her betrayal. He eventually pulled into an empty parking lot and sat in silence. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, raw and unrelenting. He clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as he tried to regain control of his emotions. As the hours passed, a new emotion began to take hold: revenge. Daniel had always believed in fairness and justice, and now he wanted Samantha to feel the pain she had caused him. He thought about her career, how much she had sacrificed to climb the corporate ladder. Her reputation, her position, they meant everything to her. "She didn't care about destroying our life," he thought bitterly. "Why should I care about destroying hers?" But as the night wore on, another voice whispered in the back of his mind. Revenge would only deepen the pain. It wouldn't heal the wound or bring him the closure he so desperately needed. When Daniel returned home the next morning, Samantha was waiting for him. She looked pale and exhausted, her eyes swollen from crying. "Daniel," she began, her voice shaky, "please. I know I hurt you and I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I love you. I love our baby. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Daniel stared at her, his heart heavy with conflicting emotions. He wanted to believe her, to hope that their love could survive this, but the pain was too fresh, the wound too deep. "I need time," he said finally. "Time to figure out if I can even look at you without feeling this betrayal." Samantha nodded, her tears flowing freely. "Take all the time you need. Just don't give up on us." Daniel avoided Samantha as much as possible in the days that followed their confrontation. Their once vibrant home was now silent, filled with the weight of unspoken words and shattered trust. The memories of their happy moments lingered like ghosts, haunting him at every turn. Samantha tried repeatedly to reach out, but Daniel couldn't bear to hear her apologies or promises. His heart was too raw, and his mind was consumed by the images of her betrayal. He needed space, but even that felt like an illusion. Everywhere he turned, he was reminded of what they had lost. Determined to make sense of it all, Daniel sought solace in the company of his closest friend, Mark. They met at a quiet bar, far from prying eyes and curious ears. Mark greeted him with a solemn expression, his concern evident. "How are you holding up?" Daniel let out a bitter laugh. "How do you think? My wife? No, the woman I thought was my wife cheated on me. She destroyed everything." Mark nodded, his gaze steady. "I can't imagine what you're going through, but you don't have to do this alone. I'm here for you." As they talked, Daniel opened up about his feelings of betrayal, anger, and despair. He confessed his fleeting desire for revenge and the emptiness it left behind. Mark listened patiently, offering support but never judgment. "Revenge won't heal you," Mark said after a long silence. "It might feel good in the moment, but it'll only keep you trapped in the pain. You need to focus on yourself now, not her." Despite Mark's words, Daniel couldn't shake the nagging need for closure. He needed to understand why Samantha had betrayed him and whether there was any truth to her claims of stress and confusion. One evening, he decided to confront Richard, the man who had been at the center of it all. Daniel waited outside the sleek corporate building where Samantha worked, his emotions boiling over as he saw Richard exit. "Richard," Daniel called, his voice sharp and unwavering. The man froze, his eyes narrowing as he turned to face Daniel. "Can I help you?" "You already have," Daniel replied, stepping closer. "You helped destroy my marriage. I want to know why." Richard's expression hardened. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation." Daniel clenched his fists, his anger barely contained. "I don't care about your convenience. You owe me an explanation." After a tense pause, Richard relented. They walked to a nearby cafe where Daniel demanded answers. "It wasn't planned," Richard admitted reluctantly. "It started as a professional relationship, but things escalated. Samantha was vulnerable, and You took advantage of her," Daniel interjected, his voice low and venomous. Richard looked away, guilt flashing across his face. "Maybe I did. But it wasn't just me. She made choices too. I didn't force her into anything." Hearing those words felt like a fresh wound, but they also gave Daniel clarity. Richard wasn't the sole villain in this story. Samantha had made her own decisions. When Daniel returned home that night, Samantha was waiting for him in the living room. She looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I need to know something," Daniel said, his voice steady but firm. "Did you ever love me, or was it all a lie?" The months following the birth of Daniel and Samantha's child, whom they named Lily, were a whirlwind of challenges, emotions, and quiet victories. While the pain of betrayal still lingered, Daniel found solace and purpose in fatherhood. Holding Lily in his arms, he realized that she was an innocent product of a love that, despite its flaws, had once been real. Daniel and Samantha agreed to co-parent, prioritizing Lily's well-being over their personal grievances. Despite their best efforts, moments of tension were unavoidable. Conversations were often clipped, and the air between them carried the weight of unresolved emotions. Samantha, however, showed a different side of herself. She was attentive, devoted, and willing to do whatever it took to make amends. Not necessarily to win Daniel back, but to rebuild his trust in her as a co-parent. One evening, after a long day of juggling work and Lily's needs, Samantha approached Daniel as he was packing up to leave after his visitation. "Daniel," she began hesitantly, "I know I've hurt you in ways I can never fully repair. But I need you to know that I'm trying, not for us, but for Lily. She deserves parents who respect each other." Daniel studied her for a moment. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the exhaustion etched on her face. "I'll always respect you as Lily's mother," he replied evenly. "But that doesn't mean I've forgiven you, not yet." Samantha nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and sadness. "I understand. Thank you for being honest." Daniel threw himself into his work, determined to create a stable and fulfilling life for Lily. But he also realized the importance of finding joy outside of being a father and provider. He joined a local gym, took up painting, a hobby he'd abandoned years ago, and began attending social events again. Slowly, he started to rebuild his confidence and sense of self. Mark, ever the loyal friend, encouraged Daniel to open himself up to the possibility of love again. "You deserve happiness, Daniel," Mark said over drinks one evening. "Don't let what Samantha did make you afraid to trust someone else." "I'm not afraid," Daniel replied thoughtfully. I need to trust myself first." 1 year after Lily's birth, Samantha asked Daniel to meet her for coffee. Reluctantly, he agreed, curious about what she had to say. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, the tension between them less sharp but still present. "I've been in therapy," Samantha began, her voice steady but vulnerable. "It's helped me understand why I did what I did. It doesn't excuse my actions, but it's given me clarity." Daniel nodded but remained silent, letting her continue. "I know I broke us," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "and I know I can never undo that. But I want you to know that I've changed. Not because I hoped to fix what we had, but because I needed to fix myself, for Lily, and for my own peace of mind." For the first time in months, Daniel felt a flicker of empathy for Samantha. While he couldn't forget or fully forgive her betrayal, he could see that she was genuinely working to become a better person. "I appreciate you telling me this," he said after a long pause. "I hope you find the peace you're looking for. And for what it's worth, I think you're a good mother to Lily." Samantha's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, a bittersweet expression of gratitude and acceptance. As time passed, Daniel found himself drawn to one of his painting classmates, a woman named Rachel. She was warm, witty, and refreshingly honest. They started as friends, bonding over their shared love of art and their mutual experiences with life's challenges. Rachel had her own scars from a past relationship, which made her understanding of Daniel's hesitance to open up. She never pushed him, but instead offered quiet support and companionship. One evening, after a particularly heartfelt conversation, Daniel realized that he was no longer defined by the pain of Samantha's betrayal. He had grown stronger, wiser, and more capable of trusting himself, and perhaps someone else. On Lily's second birthday, Daniel hosted a small party at his home. Samantha attended, and for the first time in years, there was no animosity between them. They worked together to make the day special for their daughter, sharing laughter and memories without the weight of the past clouding the moment. As the party wound down and Lily played with her new toys, Daniel watched her with a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. Rachel joined him, her hand brushing against his. "She's beautiful," Rachel said softly. "She is," Daniel replied, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time in what felt like forever, Daniel allowed himself to hope, not just for Lily's future, but for his own. Life had not turned out the way Daniel had once envisioned, but in its unpredictability, he found strength, love, and resilience. Samantha's betrayal had shattered him, but it had also forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities and rediscover the man he wanted to be. He learned that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing himself from it. As he looked around the room, filled with laughter and the people he cared about most, Daniel realized that life's greatest pain often led to its most profound transformations. He smiled to himself, ready to embrace whatever came next.